So first stop on our tour, this is right here. This is IR1. This is the Comox community here. This photo is taken in 1865, like right across the street from here. So if you were, well, there was no dike road, but if you were to pull in by canoe, this is exactly what you would have seen. And I use this slide or this photo rather in almost every presentation about KFN because it really captures this idea of a hybrid or dual cultural identity. I don't know how much folks know here about Comox, but Comox were, and Pentlatch as well to a degree, right, physically located at the northern fringe of the Coast Salish world, right? You go south of here and there's 17 other Coast Salish nations all the way to Victoria and all the way up the Fraser River, all with a fairly similar culture, different languages, but constructed in very, very similar ways. But you get north of here, and it's a completely different language family, right? A Wakashan language family, not related to Coast Salish in the slightest. Kwakwakwakw and Comox are as closely related as Turkish and French, as in not related at all. There's 0% relationship. But Comox here, living at that fringe between these two cultural worlds, takes on a little bit of both, right? It takes on some of these northern traits, it takes on some of these southern traits. Certainly the language is Coast Salish, right? It's absolutely the names, the grammar, that's all Coast Salish. But a lot of the other cultural stuff that folks did, the way they potlatched, the way they represented themselves, the way they designed their houses and their communities sometimes is very much northern. So here in this stretch of the village here, we can see two separate houses side by side. That house in the middle, that long one running parallel to the beach, is a Coast Salish style house. Every Coast Salish style house has to run parallel to the beach. Usually they have a shed roof that slopes from front to back. This one does the reverse. But so these guys are decidedly announcing, really like on a cultural billboard, we're Coast Salish. And anybody coming into this community via canoe would know right away that's how those guys identify, right? They're Comox, but they're identifying this sort of Coast Salish cultural background. And then we look immediately to the left and the right, and it's a different style of house, right? It's still a plank house, but it's oriented perpendicular to the beach, and it's a gable roof, right? It's got a ridge pole and slopes going both directions, and every single house that you see from Comox to the north, all the way to Alaska, is oriented this way, right? That's the culturally appropriate way that everyone to the north and to the west makes a house. And conversely, if you go to the south of here, all the way to Puget Sound and all the way up the river to Yale, every single house looks like that. And this is one of only two communities in the entire Pacific Northwest where you see these two side by side, right? So just the style of the house, you can see this intermingling of these two cultures and these two ways of representing yourself. We know these people are K'ómoks and Pentlatch. We actually know whose families these are. They're Comox and Pentlatch, but they're representing themselves as Southern Coast Salish and Northern Kwakwakwakw. So to me, that's fascinating. And once you sort of learn the sort of cultural rule behind these houses, it's like, well, that's really important. Like, there's nothing accidental here. These guys are very purposely making their houses in that fashion to self-identify who they are. Final feature that I absolutely love in this photo are these two totem poles. Totem poles are decidedly a northern cultural trait. Around this time, late 1800s, you wouldn't see any totem poles south of here, certainly not in the Coast Salish world. You might see grave markers or carved house posts inside houses, but you'd never see totem poles like that. They simply don't exist. So these Comox folks have clearly borrowed or adapted this trait from the north. But they've changed it too, right? If you look closely at these photos, these poles, they're not mythical ancestors, they're not eagles, they're not whales. It's a guy in a top hat. And this guy has a British sailor's cap on as well too. So these aren't images of mythical ancestors, these are the images of the chiefs who live in those houses. And I have to add the photo because there's only one Comox chief who has this amazing beaver top hat. So that's got to be his house. There's no way it's anybody else's house but that. So the poles, again, you see this borrowing of northern culture, adapting it into this distinctively Comox and Pentlatch way. And so what we get is this weird hybrid mix of really interesting traits that are borrowed from both and cooked into this really very interesting Comox package. And I find that folks tend to think of one or the other, this sort of dichotomix. You're either Kwakwakwakw or you're Coast Salish. And it's not really like that, right? It's a little bit of both, but it's cooked up in its own unique fashion. So K'ómoks and Pentlatch have a very interesting sort of cultural history that makes them quite distinct compared to folks to the north and the south of here. Second slide. Still at the same place. We're still at the Comox village. I wanted to sort of highlight some of the archaeology here a little bit. I am an archaeologist and I can do deep dives into archaeology, and I'm really trying my best not to in this presentation, trying to keep it more cultural, other things like that. So the remains of this village underneath this building and underneath the houses all around here go back to at least 400 AD. There's been very minimal excavation here, but there is a fairly substantial archaeological site right around the corner on Bayside, that way. And that's where this photo was taken. This is the historic cemetery there in 1865, and now it is the modern KFN cemetery in whatever year we're at now. And so archaeologically, right, we've got places for the living in these houses where hundreds of people lived for hundreds and hundreds of years. We've got places for the dead, where the dead were put away. These little miniaturized wooden houses are mortuary houses, right? So rather than people being buried in the ground, they're put in little boxes or canoes or just wrapped in blankets and put in these little houses. Places for the living, places for the dead, places for making things, right? There are probably canoe sheds and workshops behind these places where guys are making all this stuff that they need. Places for parties, that's what this is. You see this scaffolding in front of this Coast Salish style house? That's a potlatch platform, and you don't get those north of here either. That's decidedly a Coast Salish thing. When you're having a potlatch, you put a bunch of planks on top there, making a patio, and the chief or his representative goes on top and chucks blankets down for everyone below, and they get to fight over them or just take them home, or however that works. So, these villages are a place for the living, place for the dead, place for doing works, place for doing parties, place for all those things. But 100 years go by, it's all made of wood, it all just sort of disappears into the ground, and it's not so obvious. So 99% of the archaeological sites that you walk around here, you can walk right through and walk over. And unless you're really kicking the ground hard or seeing a big root wall, throwing it up, you don't see any of this, right? So people sometimes ask me, well, why are there people buried here? It's like, well, it's a cemetery. It was a cemetery for 1,000 years. There's lots of people buried here. We should expect a cemetery, right? Anywhere where people live, people die, and people go into the cemetery. So these archaeological sites, you'll hear me refer to them as shellmans. You guys are probably familiar with this term. If you're not, it's just this shelly debris with lots of fire-broken rock and animal bones and fish bones and all that stuff that results of people living their regular day-to-day life, taking care of business, cooking, taking care of their families, and occasionally having big parties.